All right, welcome back to the Christian Bitcoin Podcast. We are joined by our dear friend Ben Haley today. I'm Tim Fox, Executive Director of the Magnalia Foundation. Bitcoin may currently be down in the dumps and lots of people discouraged about it, but Ben and I are here today and we're going to talk about something else, a perennial evergreen topic of relationships, emotions, how to relate to other people. People who are into technology are infamously not so good at these things. And Ben and I just want to talk a little bit about what it looks like to relate to other people in a healthy way in a world where so much has changed with social media and everything, and apparently where things are going to change even more with all these AI-related changes and job changes, vocational changes, and how people are struggling to navigate all that. Ben, why did you want to talk to us today about emotions and leadership?
Well, I stumbled upon this stuff a few years ago, and it was pretty revolutionary as I was planting our church. So, excuse me, you have books that teach you how to plant church. You have what you call the hard skills. You have the technical knowledge to plant a church in our denomination. For example, you need to be an ordained minister. That means baseline, you got to have Bible, theology, church history, sacraments, book of church order. You got to have all those things. You got to know those things cold. And then on top of that layer, church planting is a whole different ballgame. And so I had been getting great coaching, good advice from a lot of people. And I was engaging with a church planter one day who's about 10 years ahead of me. His church had become established. And I was describing to him some of the frustrations I was having, or like I couldn't figure out what dynamic was going on. There were certain dynamics going on in our church, and I didn't know how to name them. I didn't know how to describe them. He said, "Hey, you need to read these books." And it was a series of books really based on family systems theory, but had been applied to broader organizational systems thinking and emotional processes that would be going on. Now, I had later figured out that was called the soft skills, right? So you walk into a room as a leader, for example, you got to be technically competent in what you're called to do. But as a leader, you also have to observe a lot of the emotional processes that are happening in a conversation or in a meeting with someone. That's what we call soft skills. So I just did a deep dive. I think this was about summer of 21. I did a deep dive into this family systems based theory of leadership, and it gave me significant language. Now, let me say up front, yes, I'm in a position of leadership of a church, but I began to realize this applies whether you are, a senior pastor of a church, or you are a CEO of a company, or you are a leader of your 5-person CrossFit group, or you are the leader of a home, or you're a stay-at-home mom, or you're the class president, whatever it is. I found that these things are true across the board. And in that case, most people over their lifetimes are going to find themselves in some sort of position of leadership. And these soft skills that we're going to talk about today, I think are like super helpful. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about today for a few minutes was just like, what is emotional intelligence? I mean, you hear it thrown, or it's become a little more popular to understand it and think about it. But where does the term come from? Why does it matter? What are some words we can put to these processes that are going on? Kind of like a meta narrative going on in a conversation or an organization. And the term emotional intelligence was actually first introduced by a guy named Peter Salovey and John Mayer in their article titled Emotional Intelligence. And it was published in the Journal of Imagination, Cognition, and Personality in 1990. And they define emotional intelligence as a form of social intelligence that involves the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate against them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking and action. So there's a lot packed into that. the first step is observing your own emotions, recognizing your own emotions. So, for example, if someone comes to you, whether it be a child or someone in your organization, they come to you and you can feel the heat, right? You can feel the anxiety. The first thing you need to do is recognize that what is your body telling you in that moment? And as soon as I heard that, I knew exactly what I was talking about, because when a person comes to me with something and they're very anxious, and I'm not talking about anxious necessarily in a bad way, I'm just saying anxious in a way that's like, this thing happened, what do I do? Then I began to observe my own really bodily reactions, where I could feel the tension in my neck. I could feel it kind of traveling down my shoulder. I could feel my heart race. And so one of the first steps in realizing that you're in this emotional intelligence level is observing your own emotions and feelings.
You're saying part of being in leadership is recognizing how other people's anxiety raises your anxiety?
Well,
kind of navigating that?
That's one way that your anxiety, you can have anxiety. That's just a person-to-person interaction. But I'm simply saying, even if I were like on an airplane and I start thinking about something hard, right? Being emotionally intelligent with myself means first observing, I'm thinking about this difficult thing. I can feel my heart racing, and I got to name it. I got to recognize that it's going on.
Right.
So the test case that I just gave you was kind of like something that kind of occurs every day,
right,
in different interpersonal reactions. So it's an ability to monitor your own emotions and feelings in a setting. And if you're interacting with something, your ability to monitor their feelings and emotions in that. And then to start discriminating among them, is this their anxiety, my anxiety? This is my anxiety. For example, I'm the only one that can be responsible for my anxiety. I can't make them responsible for my anxiety, right? They may have anxiety, and that may trigger my anxiety, but at that moment, I'm actually responsible for my anxiety. And then to use that information, and this could take like 8 seconds to recognize in a situation, right? To use that information then to guide how you're going to respond, okay? So Goldman's 5 components of emotional intelligence. Let me try to boil it down like this. So the first component is one we just talked about, self-awareness, right? The ability to recognize and understand your mood, emotions, and drivers, as well as that impact on others. Okay? For example, when I come in anxious in my family system, my family goes quiet. And when they go quiet, that's a signal to me to monitor me to go, they're quiet right now because I'm coming in hot. Right. And not necessarily like overtly, it's just I'm coming in and they can feel the anxiety. So I've got to grow my self-awareness. The second component is self-regulation. So you got to be aware first, then you move into self-regulation. And this is the ability to control or redirect these disruptive impulses and moods. And so this is this propensity to suspend your judgment on a situation before you act or even speak. Okay? So self-awareness, self-regulation, right? Motivation, a passion to work for reasons that go beyond money or status or your personal goals, right? A propensity to pursue goals with energy and persistence. So, for example, in an organization situation, my motivation has to be for the good of the organization. It doesn't need to be, I don't have to win the argument. I don't have to be right. My ideas don't have to win the day, because my motivation is the overall good of the organization itself, whether it be your personal family or your CrossFit group or your company or your church. Okay? All right. The next component is called empathy. Now, I know empathy is like all over the map right now on XFeed, but let me just get back to what this definition of empathy is. The ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people and it's a skill in treating other people according to their emotional reactions. So I see empathy in this situation as simply meeting someone where they are, right? I'm gonna sit in this with you. That doesn't mean that I need to take on all of the emotion that you're feeling to myself.
Right.
It just means I'm recognizing and sitting with you. Yeah, go ahead.
And you're not using it in this more negative way that people talk about of kind of enabling other people's problems.
No, I'm strictly speaking from, the definition of these emotional process, emotional intelligence, inside of that schema through literature, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of this echo of the incarnation of God becoming human and coming to dwell among us.
Yes, exactly.
Dwell among us.
God is saying, I'm going to come into this with you, right? I'm not going to take I don't have to absorb everything that you're feeling, but I'm going to be in this with you. And then social skills, right? Proficiency in managing relationships and building networks, and ability to find common ground and build rapport. There's another great book called Crucial Conversations that has helped me tremendously, where when you find yourself in a high stakes conversation where the emotions can run pretty hot, social skills in this emotional intelligence schema is going to involve, you get everybody in the room and you say, let's find one thing that we are mutually for and build from there. That's a social skill that you can develop, right? And let me say this too, on all these things, I've kind of been in different leadership roles my entire life. I had to unlearn a lot of stuff.
Right.
This has been very helpful to me. For example, when you come into a room and you figure out, well, this person wants this for this organization, and this person wants this for this organization. So you go, okay, can we both agree that we are both for the good of the organization? We can build from that mutual purpose. That's just an example. Make sense? So that's just kind of like a flyover on emotional intelligence, right? I think the self-awareness thing is pretty critical, because once you start there, once you recognize what's going on with you in those moments, whether you're by yourself or you're engaging with a person individually or you're engaging with a group, you're already off to a good foot, right? On good footing.
Right. Yeah, and there are corners of the church, corners of work, corners of society where people are suspicious of emotions and kind of downplay them and want to emphasize, kind of like what you're saying at the beginning, they want to emphasize kind of the more cognitive, technical skills. Sometimes in ministry you see people who, to you, it's very obvious this person is an emotional mess, but they are struggling to admit their emotions.
Right.
Or they confuse their emotions for something else. How do you help people in worlds and systems who are suspicious of emotions or think, we just need to talk about IQ. What is all this weird EQ stuff?
We're about to talk about IQ. That's a good point. They're definitely not mutually exclusive, because if you think about it, everything that I just articulated are cognitive decisions that you make as a result of observation, right? So you're to put it in like, a scientific way, you're taking the amygdala and you're building a highway to the frontal cortex, right? The amygdala is your fight or flight. Frontal cortex is where you organize exactly what's going on. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. I'm talking about when your body reacts to things, it just reacts to things, right? So the classic example is if you're walking down a sidewalk and out of the corner of your eye, you see something coiled, you're going to freak out for a second because you think it might be a rattlesnake.
Right.
But it's this rope. Well, what happened between you thinking it was a rattlesnake and it was a rope? It went from your amygdala to your frontal cortex, where the frontal cortex organized the information. And then, so I don't think those are mutually exclusive things at all.
You talked about part of this is people learning to regulate their emotions and not just kind of seeing them for what they are, which is a big step, but control them at some level. But many of us, the way we experience our emotional life feels, like you're saying, very much out of our control. Like it just kind of washes over me. It comes at me. I have no control over it. how do you navigate this, at least the experience of feeling like it comes out of nowhere and I'm not choosing to feel certain ways versus, no, I need to learn to control this and regulate it?
I'd say a couple things. One, I struggle with panic attacks. Sometimes they come out of nowhere. I don't know. And at that moment, I try to be very gracious with myself to say, we live in a fallen world, right? And we're going to have these embodied emotional reactions. Sometimes to things like walking down the sidewalk and thinking we see a coiled up snake, but sometimes building of a chronic thing, a chronic life of anxiety, right? And that's really kind of what we're really talking about is anxiety, right? And how to name that anxiety, how to begin to organize that anxiety so that it doesn't dominate you.
Is it a matter of kind of doing some work before the anxiety hits so that it comes differently? I mean, what kinds of things do you do to help people
a couple
prepare
things
for it?
Well, a couple things. A great book called Leadership Anxiety, Yours and Theirs by Steve Cuss. And the reality is most of your learning is done by reflection on moments that you had throughout a day and saying, okay, what was happening? What did I have on my calendar? What did I have? What was I thinking about that was building my anxiety? And so that looking back is probably one of the most beneficial things. And being gracious with yourself and learning in real time how to navigate these things. I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. I said two things, but I can't remember the second one.
How does this, so personality tests are a big thing.
Yes.
And people can get really kind of fixated on that of like, well, this is my personality. I just kind of do this. That's just how I am.
Right.
I just don't have the social skills.
Right.
And you're talking about development and growth and learning these things.
Yes.
How would you speak to all that?
My personal opinion is that this stuff flies above all that stuff.
Okay.
That's my personal opinion. I've taken the personality tests, but because these ideas, and particularly the anxiety idea, differentiation, which we could talk about in another episode, these ideas are rooted in family stories and family systems theory. I think those rise above personality. I think my personality is definitely also informed by, for example, my family system or the last 20 plus years being an ordained minister for sure. But I don't think, I think personality can be used as a crutch. I think it's meant to be used to channel you in a direction where you are where you are flourishing with your gifts the most. So I honestly think this stuff flies above that. In other words, and I also think these things can be learned and a skill that can be honed by anyone. I really do.
Right.
Yeah.
You and I were recently talking about young people at your church coming with no church background, no real training. We're living in a different world than 30, 40 years ago in church life. Have you found that kind of with the spiritual wasteland that young people are coming out of, do you find them also coming out of an emotional wasteland? How do you help people as a pastor?
Yes, some. It's interesting. The interplay between, spiritual, emotional, psychological, bodily, it's all tied together. I'm not going to go out on a limb. I've had young people who come from fully atheist homes who on the surface you're like, man, they're pretty emotionally intelligent. They understand the language that I'm talking about. But they haven't submitted all of that to the Lord. And then you've got people who come from, really good spiritually rooted backgrounds who are have a pretty big gap and deficit here.
Yeah, I mean, you can have people who are on one level very mature They know a lot about the Bible. They have leadership positions. They have a lot of experience, but are very emotionally childish, so to speak.
Yes.
I had a pastor friend one time tell me, he said, I think the main reason that church leaders, when they really kind of struggle and blow up in relationships with other people in the church, it's not usually because they've had some big moral failure, and it's not usually because they have some big theological error that they've fallen into. It's usually, he didn't call it emotional intelligence, but that's what he was talking about. It's just this relational kind of struggle,
yes.
incompetence.
So another reason why I was very motivated to study this is because for about 10 years, I was chairman of our ministerial relations committee of our presbytery. Mm-hmm. And that the hard stuff came to us. The infighting in churches between elders or the pastor or that sort of thing. And so several times, I actually, in certain situations, I would be called in to moderate a session meeting to kind of just slow everything down and say, let's understand what's going on.
Right.
It was always this stuff.
Right. Yeah, what people think is their problem is rarely
100%. It was always this stuff.
Right.
And this helped me give language and help them give language, because they would say, this is the problem. And I'm like, that's a content hard skill level problem. This is really what's going on right now in this room. This is happening. I just want to give words to it.
One of the beautiful but challenging dynamics of life in church ministry is that churches tend to attract people who are struggling. And there's something really good about that, and that's what the church is here for. In a similar way, I have sometimes wondered and suspected whether leadership itself and church leadership itself tends to attract people who have particular problems. Maybe it's because I hang around them a lot, but there seems to me to be a lot of pastors with daddy issues. And is there a danger that leadership and church leadership, or, again, like you said, it doesn't have to be church, it could be CrossFit.
Right.
Is there a danger that people are drawn to wanting to be a leader and influence people out of a kind of emotional brokenness?
That's the last several years of my counseling, Tim. Thank you for identifying that. No, it's totally true. You can develop like a Messiah complex for sure.
Right.
And it's really just covering your own shame.
Right.
What's
the relationship between shame and anxiety?
Well, feeling less than, which I kind of define as shame as feeling less than, not seen or not heard, or there's a gap there, and you want to fill that gap with a building of self in some way. Right. And there's all sorts of ways you can do it. But you can get people to like you and affirm you in my kind of position.
Right.
You can.
And it's not really that hard to kind of deceive people into thinking that you're something great.
It's not. It's not hard.
And not even that you are doing it intentionally.
I would say for years and years I was doing that, and I didn't. There was fruit. I mean, there were symptoms of it. Mm-hmm. Particularly, my wife was helping me. She didn't have language necessarily for it either, but something was off. But yes, it's definitely, and it's like a drug. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just needing people to affirm me, so then that fills that void of feeling less.
Right. Well, and something like social media.
Yes.
It's like pouring gasoline on that fire.
Yeah, right. I can totally put out a persona on X or Facebook or whatever. I can curate that. Right. But we were made for embodied interaction, and nothing is going to be able to replace that. And so how do we do relationship? And how do we identify some of these dynamics going on so that we can come together, especially in the body of Christ, right?
Right. Do you, as we kind of are living through this, what looks like a very rapid change in kind of how technology works and society works and people's jobs, and more things look like they're going to be automated very quickly. The kind of hard skills, a lot of the hard skills seem to have kind of, we don't maybe need them as much as we thought we did.
They're going to be taking care of
The
themselves.
software engineers are all freaked out
That's
because
right.
all of a sudden the computers are taking over their jobs, even
That's
though
right.
5 years ago we were telling everybody, well, you just got to learn to code. Do you see the soft skills kind of rising in importance in a world where maybe outwardly we're becoming more affluent, life is easy, there's robots doing things, computers can do all kinds of things for you in the more hard skill side of things? How and why do soft skills become more important?
Well, I mean, in a lot of different ways. Again, if we're built for embodied interaction, then a hard skills, what you can do is you can collapse your identity into, your job, your knowledge of something, right? And if those things are being kind of taken care of, I think some people are going to have a crisis like, who am I?
Right.
Right. And this is where I think the gospel is beautiful. It's like, who you are is not what you do. Who you are is who you are in Christ. And meeting people there. I may not be quite understanding what you're...
how do you help people as a leader and as a pastor? How and why do you have such a heart right now to help them grow in the soft skills, given the ways that...
The soft skills are a means. They're not an end in themselves. That may be going back to one thing for a second. You can learn the soft skills in order to manipulate.
Right.
Which would be, you would be betraying the actual goal of the soft skills.
What is the goal? Succinctly, what would you say it is?
I think healthy relationship. The propagation of healthy relationships.
Right.
Because that's what we were made for. That's what I would say.
And not just with people, fundamentally with the Lord.
Yes, absolutely. Vertical influences horizontal. Yeah, of course, there's a lot of assumptions as you and I are sitting here talking about what enables and what empowers us to move towards one another, away from isolation, away from, curating those personas that we want to. Right. There's a settledness in the Lord that must be first and foremost, that then moves you into, I think, I use the word adventure a lot, but adventure of what does redemptive human-to-human interaction look like in beautiful ways. I think our society is the word bereft of that completely right now.
Right.
We've forgotten how to talk to one another. Right. I'm very passionate about how we talk to one another. And I see these things. I see these things in ways that, in many different ways that Paul encourages Christians on how to live together.
Right.
With kindness and gentleness and benefit of the doubt and leaning into one another, exhorting one another as long as it is called today. I see these skills as only really a catalyst for making that happen, because that ultimately is a beautiful witness of God himself and to his glory alone. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think often of Jesus's kind of varied exhortations to childlikeness, that you have to be like a child to enter the kingdom. And I think a lot of that, not all of it, but I think a lot of that has to do with a childlike kind of simplicity and kind of nonchalance, to where children are wonderfully kind of impractical and they are wonderfully unmanipulative on a good day, to where, like adults, especially in our world, we tend to like, okay, what is this really about? What's the point? What's the outcome? What am I producing? Am I doing something? Are people watching me? Kids at their best, why do they like swinging? Why do they like running around? Why do they like playing games? Why do they love their parents so much? It's like, well, if you ask them, it's like, I don't know. I just do. And it's almost like the game is its own point. The loving mom and dad is its own point, and reading the same book for the 500th time is kind of its own point. And I wonder sometimes if part of what Jesus wants is for us to get back to that, as a preparation for an eternity of still growing in the new creation. We'll always be growing. We'll always be learning about the Lord, and we'll always be learning more about his world. But I think in other ways, life in eternity with the Lord in the new creation will be endlessly and wonderfully the same thing over and over and over again, and learning to enjoy that like kids do.
I mean, Eugene Peterson, in his multi-volume work that started with Christ Plays in 10,000 Places, as you were talking, I just kept thinking of the word of play, right?
Right.
That's what we were.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it's like, if you as pastors, you sometimes run across people in church who are kind of constantly asking themselves, well, what am I getting out of this?
Right.
And it's like that, whether it's in church or it's in marriage or whatever it is, that is the kiss of death.
Yes.
For anything and everything. Is constantly seeing everything through your own lens, like seeing yourself in everything. I've been reading a book slowly by C.S. Lewis about reading and how to read and how to enjoy art. And he says this is really the key to truly enjoying art and literature and culture, is basically removing yourself from the equation, that it's not about you. And I've been chewing on that a lot. And I think sometimes, like what you're talking about, this kind of relational health, relational settledness, is this learning, this just kind of acceptance of just like, here's who you are that God's made you to be. Here's who I am. We're all going to be okay with that. And I'm just going to accept it, instead of what do I get out of this? What can I get you to do for me? How are you thinking about me? It's a wonderful thing.
It is.
To just be able to sit there and enjoy it.
And it's the same thing like reading the Bible.
Right.
It's not about me. It's about God. And that actually frees me to kind of go, oh, God's going to talk about who he is.
Right.
And why he loves, and who he, how he loves. And he's like, hey, come play with me.
Right. Right.
That's really the whole story of the Bible.
Right.
It's God saying like, hey, come play with me.
Right.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's great. Yeah. I mean, that's, the kind of final chapters of the Bible is God coming to dwell with his people.
Yep.
And, it's the beginning of the end that goes on forever and ever and ever.
Yep.
But it's just the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's just like, all right, God's here, and we're all going to enjoy this together, and we're with one another, and it's wonderful. What challenges do you see in our world helping people come to this kind of relational health and understanding? What are some of the main roadblocks that people are sabotaging themselves and their relationships?
Yeah, structural isolation. So down to like, cul-de-sacs, right? I'm talking about like spatial structural isolation. I've had the privilege of going to other countries and being with other Christian communities. They all live within a half mile of each other. So they're always in each other's homes. They're always like seeing each other on the street multiple times a day. So I do think structural isolation is like a big deal. Somebody, I read something one time about the invention of the air conditioning and how it just killed.
So everyone could just stay in their houses?
Yep. Right. Before that, everybody had to sit on the front porch.
Yeah.
It was too hot to sit inside.
Well, and it's like,
that's just one piece, right?
It makes me think of like small groups. How, a lot of churches in our world have a small group program to try to get people to be in relationship with each other.
That's right.
That's not a bad thing. Sometimes you kind of need to build rails to help guide people into things. But it can also be a challenge, because it's kind of like, all right, well, it's 7:30 on Wednesday night. Let's sit down and we're relating to each other. Yeah. And it's like, if you try to force it, it's just, in some ways, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. We had to talk about that early on in the church plant when we were structuring our small groups. And I read another book about small groups, and I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, it basically was talking about like, you can't coerce relationship in a small group. All you can do is create a context in which there can be a certain level of interaction. And what you want is when people leave the small group, as they're walking out the door, that's where the relationship really happens. Is all you're doing is you are structuring embodied interaction, but you can't demand a small group of 6 to 8 people. And this is why they limited their groups. You can't demand that a small group of 6 to 8 people that everybody share their deep, dark secrets with each other. Mm-hmm. What you can do is provide a context in which there's some embodied interaction, some comfortability to where one or two of those people, then they start pairing off. 2 women walk out of a women's Bible study, and they're connecting on the deep level. So a lot of that's in the literature too. That was super helpful to me because I did have some that were just like, we really want to go deep and get to know each other. And then I had other people saying, that scares me to death. But like, if you take me on a walk, we could probably get to know each other. And I was like, there it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying before about being able to recognize.
Activate. That was the name of the small group book. Activate. Go ahead. Yep.
What you're saying earlier about kind of being able to accept kind of what's happening to you as one of the first steps in being able to manage it.
Yeah, observe what's happening to you. Yeah.
In a similar way, I've kind of more and more come to think that in relationships with other people, you need to just kind of accept them for who they are.
Yep.
And not constantly try to like, how do I get them to be more?
That's right.
How do I get more out of this?
Right.
And in some ways, it's like, are we lowering the bar? You know, I came out of a college ministry when I was young as a Christian that was this very intensely relational, intensely emotional, intensely kind of spiritual environment where everything was just like one mountaintop experience to another. And if you weren't doing that or feeling that, something was wrong with you. You didn't really love Jesus.
Right.
And learning more and more, I think as I get older, that like most of the Christian life is kind of a plod and not that exciting.
Yep.
And that's okay.
Yep.
And that's actually maybe God's plan.
Yes.
To not live from one giant experience to another. How do you help people navigate that in relationships, which are often very disappointing, especially when you live in a kind of a very pragmatic world that wants everything to be always getting bigger and better?
Yes.
And you destroy everything.
Yes. While we were enemies, Christ died for us. Okay, I'm going to extract back from that for a second. We should know better. We should act better. We should be better. We should, right? Counselor. I had a counselor. Have you ever heard him say, "Don't should on yourself"?
Yeah.
Right. Taking somebody where they are, and that also means taking you where you are.
Right.
And that also means God recognizing that God took you and takes you as you are. You don't stay there. He doesn't keep you where you are. But you're never going to be able to heal from all the facets of brokenness that we face every day, unless you name what is. And being able to engage one another on taking us as we are, I think is fundamental to, especially an effective Christian witness, right? Instead of the should.
Right.
What I found is when I think people ought to be here and they're here, I stay frustrated.
Right.
But when I take people here and I realize we got Jesus who's no longer in a grave, I'm like, oh, we got hope. We're here, but we're not without hope. But if I stay in the should, I'm going to stay in bitterness and disappointment.
Right.
And that started with me, right? That started with, not just started, but continues with a refresher on the gospel for myself.
Right, yeah. I recently went back and was reviewing the famous little book on community by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I was preaching a sermon on community a couple months ago. And he had this famous line where he talks about the Christian who loves their idea of the community more than the community itself destroys the community.
Yep.
And in this context of, Bonhoeffer can be very provocative. He loves to throw grenades and say things in crazy ways. But he had this line in there where he was talking about how God hates our dreaming. He hates visionary dreaming. And what he means is, that sounds like, what? That sounds like the worst thing ever in kind of American Christianity. God hates my vision. But what he means is, we bring these ideas to what people should be and what the church should be. And we have our chainsaw and we just start hacking everything apart because we have this great super spiritual vision of what they want. And part of what he's saying is part of what God wants to do with bringing Christians into your life. He said, and Bonhoeffer says, they're going to be really disappointing in a lot of ways. And he says, and if you're lucky, you will be a real disappointment to yourself if you realize that.
Yes.
And you should be thanking God every day.
Yes.
That he showed you that you're a lot less than you thought you were. And that's really the starting place to actually just enjoy people and love them because I'm loving them in Christ and they are Christ to me in many ways. Yeah. And just to accept that.
Our friend, so we read that book on our ministry team a couple of years ago together over about 3 months. And of course, that's the quote that hooked them as well, hooked all of us in. But a mutual good friend of ours, Jay Simmons, who planted Grace and Peace in Austin, I remember him giving a report at Presbytery, and he said, community is not found, it's formed. And that always stuck with me, and it actually freed me up because as a leader of an organization, I felt like I had to hit these standards of what community is so that people would find community at my church. But when he said community is formed, it freed me up to look at all my people and say, hey, let's figure this out together. You know, we can do this. Let's form it together. You know what I mean? Let's just show up.
Well, and the giftedness of the Christian community, that this is something that God has given to me to be accepted, not to be kind of like, oh, I don't really like it, God. I wish you gave me something else.
Right.
And like, yeah, there's things that it could be better always. And there's a healthy aspect of striving for it to be better.
Yeah.
But that never forgetting that, hey, these people are a gift.
But that's a matter of trust. Even the striving, the need for us to jump in to just make sure that we get the law in there, as you and I are talking about, you know, these sorts of being together. We're like, yeah, but the law's got to be in there. What I think is true, and what I think the Bible teaches, is that being is a formation into Christ who goes and does, right? And of course, there can be these moments where we exhort one another, of course. But I think we've just got to hold on to that rod behind our, backs to whip people into shape or to whip ourselves into shape. And I'm just like, the law is a command, but don't forget, it's really an invitation to true life.
Right.
And the fruit of the gospel is a love for the law. Just say it like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Let's finish. Speaking of Christ as the one who comes and who gives and provides, tell me some aspects of the life and the ministry of Jesus that you find particularly beautiful or challenging or encouraging in terms of his own emotional life and his own emotional intelligence and his own relating to other people.
Oh, man. I'm not going to remember all the verse references.
That's okay.
It's the section where I think it's the Festival of the Booths, and the disciples are really wanting Jesus to go to Jerusalem.
Right.
They're just wanting him. They're like, man, let's roll this thing out. We're rolling this thing out global. Let's go, boss.
Right.
And he's like, no, it's not time.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and the two guys that come to him and he wants to settle in his inheritance, and he's just like, you're not even asking the right question. I mean, it's just beautiful the way that my point is, Jesus is not shaken by anxiety that's coming his direction. I think that our new nature can propel us into that kind of Christ-likeness. That's where I think this level of conversation, looking at a lot of Jesus interactions, Martha wants Jesus she wants to triangle Jesus with the interaction with Mary. Martha's in the kitchen, Mary's sitting at Jesus' feet. That's triangling right there. Right. And Jesus is like, no, we're not doing it like that. That's an emotionally intelligent response from Jesus that I think we can develop and grow into in our humanity. I think that's also a very important aspect. So those are just a few. Yeah.
Right. I think I used to think, even if I didn't think it consciously, I kind of viewed Jesus as almost this robot who kind of drifted above the emotional life. Because I would see things like what you're saying, oh wow, Jesus always has these great responses to people's questions and their manipulations. And I think what I've thought for a long time was he just kind of didn't feel anything, and he didn't really connect with anybody. He just kind of was above it all. But to see that and to understand that, no, Jesus in his true humanity,
yes,
he really was betrayed by these guys and felt it.
That's right.
And that when he went off to pray in the garden the night before he was arrested, and he asked his three best friends in the world, please pray for me, stay awake and pray. And he goes off and he says, my soul is troubled to death, and he's sweating blood. He's so anxious, speaking of anxiety.
Yep, he's got anxiety.
And to come back and find his best friends in the world all nodding off and sleeping.
Yep.
And that he wasn't just saying stuff so that, it could get written down in the Bible and we could learn about it, but that he was really feeling those things. But that at the same time, like you're saying, he wasn't utterly devastated by it. He didn't, cut off all of the disciples and say, you're all toxic and I want nothing to do with you ever again. He loves them and he goes to die for them and he restores them. He restores Peter after Peter has betrayed him, and, interestingly, does it over a meal. Let's have some fish together, Peter. Peter, do you love me? Oh, yes, Lord, I love you. He gives Peter the opportunity to express his love and restores him. In a lot of ways, Peter could have become Judas. Judas also betrayed Jesus, but committed suicide. He escaped from the whole thing. Peter betrayed Jesus in a different way, and wasn't utterly lost. And Jesus restored him. And it's just this beautiful picture of the hope that God always offers to us, of restoration, even as Jesus, of course, in his humanity, genuinely feels these things and longs for his people. I think that was another big thing for me too, is that this theological idea of the totus Christus, the total Christ, that Jesus in some sense is not complete without his church gathered to him and united to him. So that when Jesus, in his Last Supper discourse at the end of John, when he's praying in John 17, says, Father, I pray that they could be with me where I am to see my glory. And I've used that at Christian funerals sometimes, where I've said, as much as we mourn this person's death, and we should mourn it, at another level, their death was an answer to Jesus' prayer, because Jesus wants his people to be with him. And that sounds like, in our world, it sounds like, oh, that's kind of man-centered, that's human-centered. We're afraid of that. But it's like, no, Jesus loves his people.
Right.
And he wants us with them, and he's missing something without us, in a sense.
And he gets to decide.
Right.
He's in a position of leadership.
Right.
He gets to make that call, and you're like, okay, cool.
Right. Well, that's great. Let's finish there, Ben. Thanks for joining us today. We'll talk more about this soon.
Thanks, Tim.